Okay, we're recording. I think we're at episode 17 or so, Roaming Free Inside the Cage by William Schafer. And we're going to be starting tonight on page 15, and we're still in chapter 1 here. But for those of you who are listening to chapter 1 and episode 15, we took the book a little out of order, right? So we are coming back to chapter 1 now. We've been talking about, he calls it a bit of a digression here. But we've been looking at the earliest experiences that we have as infants and children. And today we're going to be talking about the shocks to those first experiences that distill down into the Enneatypes that we eventually manifest as adults. The three centers of experience that we talked about, whether it's body, whether it's heart, whether it's mind, and the nine Enneatypes, and everything that becomes the content of our personality is distilled down from these earliest experiences. And so for the past few weeks, we've been talking about what those centers of experience are and the three elements of infantile experience, presence and joy and awareness of other people's awareness is where we were talking about just in the last couple of weeks. Now he's going to talk about what breaks up those first pure experiences of the infant, that presence before cognition that we just read about, that joy that is the consequence of that pure presence, and then the beginnings of the awareness of other people's awareness that eventually manifests into actual connection and communication at a cognitive level in language and symbol and so on and so forth. But what breaks all that down? What are the things that break things down so that those first layers of hurt and trauma and the programs that we run internally at the unconscious level to counter those and to be able to survive childhood that then continue to run into adulthood when they're now just limiting us at times? Now, where do those start? He's calling those the three shocks of embodiment. So let's go ahead and get into that in page 15. So he says, first of all, the appearance of each newborn brings tears of joy, not to just parents, but even to nurses and doctors who witness the event day after day. Why is this experience so powerful? I believe its power originates in the mystery of our own arrival. The human soul has three functions: to be present, to be joyful, and to share the single point of awareness that grounds all existence. It's a big sentence. We'll come back to that.
Mm.
As we have just seen, these functions are very much alive upon our arrival. The healthy baby of an unmedicated mother is born alert and fairly calm. He manages to wiggle up his mother's belly to her breast if allowed to do so. And if misfortune or modern science prevents him from having this experience at birth, he will usually get another chance soon. You and I had some such passage into embodied consciousness. We had no language with which to encode it, so we cannot remember it in story form. But we experienced it nonetheless. Our first experience of being present as a body filled us with awe, and it happened in the company of at least one other human being. I believe it is the lost joy of that moment that brings the tears to our eyes at the sight of yet another arrival. We still long for the purity of that first moment of simply loving being here together. For we are at our deepest soul level. We are at our deepest soul level of being loving aware. Whenever we encounter other such moments in nature, in romantic love, with our children, friends, teachers, and therapists, we inscribe them in our memories as signposts to guide us back to similar encounters again. This is our nature. In the spiritual traditions, these are called sacred spaces, encounters with essence, or Wan Shi, the original life energy. We had our first taste of them, if we were fortunate, as we arrived. I want to stop there and let's go back and break it apart. But any initial takeaways? Anything jump off the page at you?
Yeah, William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. I now want to go back and reread them in light of
Mm.
what he's saying here about embodiment.
Mm.
Kind of reminded me of William Wordsworth, Ode to, what was it? I can't remember. Anyway, he talks about the infant being born, trailing clouds of glory, you know,
Mm.
coming into the world, trailing these clouds of glory, still, in that remembrance of what was before that quickly dissipates.
Mm.
Yeah, Intimations of Immortality.
There it
It's
is.
in there somewhere.
Yeah,
Gotta
intimations of
be.
immortality.
Mm.
Okay. Well, let's go back a little bit and pick a little bit of this apart. Um, I love the his kind of what would you call it? Just a a summary of what he sees as the reason for this joy or this interpretation of what he sees as the joy, because it is pretty universal. For people to experience a birth or see a newborn, there is kind of a universal reaction in most of us. There are some of us that are jaded enough that it doesn't cut through anymore, I suppose, you know. But for most of us, there's something that really touches us. So the appearance of each newborn brings tears of joy, not just to parents, but even to nurses and doctors who witness the event day after day. They're seeing this all the time. And yet it kind of never gets old, right? Why is this experience so powerful? Now, he says that he believes the power originates in the mystery of our own arrival. So this is triggering something in us. It's not just what we're seeing externally, but it's triggering something in us. It's triggering a memory. And I love the way he puts it, a memory before we had language, so we don't remember it in story form. That was a great line. So it's triggering something in us, the mystery of our own arrival. The human soul has three functions: to be present, to be joyful, and to share the single point of awareness that grounds all existence. That is a big point.
Mm.
What is he really saying there? The single point of awareness that grounds all existence. Anyone want to riddle me that?
I want to go back to the three functions first, to be present, to be joyful, to share. To me, to be present and to share are active things you do, but to be joyful, to me, it's like a byproduct of
Yeah, that's what he
sharing.
said earlier. He said the joy was the consequence
Um,
of the presence,
mhm.
right? So the presence, now remember, at the infant level, this is nothing that they can be proud of or beat their chest over because they have no choice but to be perfectly present because they're still a blank slate. They're still the tabula rasa, right? They haven't they don't have the experiences that we have as adults that cloud our perceptions of things or create biases or preconceptions or distract us. And so the child is present fully because basically has no other choice. And the joy that comes from that presence is what is now eluding us because how often are we really that present? It's so rare in adult life that we have that kind of presence.
Mhm.
But to share the single point of awareness that grounds all existence, what do you think he's talking about there?
The thing is that the gaze that Lindy's son and his son looking at each other, you share that existence at that moment.
I like
I
that.
I was thinking it's the science and non-duality people would probably say like it's we're all expressions of God's awareness. Like like there is just yeah. Yeah, I think that's it.
Hmm. I like that too.
I can see the ancient scribes who wrote the um, the first book of Genesis. The Imago Dei seems to resonate in that place. The single point of awareness.
Hmm. He said image of God in Latin,
Yeah.
Imago Dei.
the thing you can't the thing you can't define, and yet you know you're part of or reflection of,
Mhm.
Mhm.
like at a soul level, not a physical. You were talking about
Mhm.
this, Dave.
Yeah, yeah.
Must be
Any other thoughts, Judy?
just that we know we all might look different in one way, shape, or form, we all share the unity of being made of a single human being.
Mm.
That unifies us.
I think the recognition that we get to at some point in life is that we are more than just somebody's kid that showed up on the playing ground of life, and there's a lot going on, and we start to get more independent, and we look less into our parents' faces, and we go off and do our independence. And lo and behold, we find at the end of years of searching and the end of our life, we want to get back to where it all started and join into that single gaze again and just be grounded in, because we don't wish for riches when we die. We don't wish for all kinds of different things. Once we know we're going to pass away and go on to the next experience, whatever that looks like, we can kind of change our focus a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my take on it.
Sounded good.
Mm.
I also pick up on where it starts, where he says the human soul has three functions. And so the single point of awareness that grounds all existence, I think I mean, one take that I might have is this soul among other souls.
Mm.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, what do you mean?
That there's no distinction. We're not different. We don't have names. We don't have faces. Where there's this soul in the presence of other souls.
A kind of connection, Brady, sort of.
A connection.
Or is Brady, is it the God within us? Is that what you're referring to? God within us?
You could put it that way. I just think I just believe that there's divine essence within everybody.
Yeah.
That's
The God
what
within
she
us.
said. The
Yeah.
God.
God within us. Right.
And that's undistinguishable between every other person.
Right.
Mm.
We're all a single piece of a larger whole. WHOLE.
I think you're all on the right track. This is good stuff. You know, there's a theory of consciousness that's floating around and gaining some traction, that there really is only one consciousness, and that every one of us is how do you put this? It's like a prairie dog poking his head out of the hole and looking around and then going back down again into the tunnel. It's like we are just manifestations of the one consciousness, each one of us in our own personality, in our own enneatype, in our own experience, constantly adding to the whole of that consciousness. Obviously, the Buddhists have that idea of each one of us returning to that consciousness as a drop to the ocean. We tend in the West to think much more individualistically than all of that. But I think at least we can say that there really is only one moment. There's only one point of awareness, and we all share that. And our whole lives come down to just now, here and now. That's it. That's all we've got to work with. And we all share that here and now, share that moment. And I think even after the threshold of death, we're still going to be in that one moment. And so for me, that single point of awareness is what we share with each other. And I think all of you are saying basically the same things. He's talking about the soul as being a being loving aware. That's what the soul is, being loving aware. And so it is that pure presence, it's that joy of the connection of that presence, and then it is sharing that awareness with all the other awarenesses that are going on. But really, we're all looking at the same point. We're looking at the same moment. We're sharing the same thing. We're just sharing it in through our own filters, through our own awareness, which we will add to the whole at some point. Um, we can look at it a whole bunch of different ways, but I do think that what he's talking about is what grounds us all together, what brings us together. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. He made no distinguishment between himself and Father. In fact, he said, I don't really even have a will of my own. I only do what is basically downloaded to me by the Father. And then he prayed in John 17 that we would all be one with each other and with him the way he and the Father are one. That's a single point of awareness that we all share. And so once again, I think everything is pointing to the same thing. We are so connected. We are really all manifestations of the same stuff, if you want to put it that way. And we think we're separated from each other, but that's what's in the egoic consciousness. And it's really the only thing that creates the illusion of separation. When that dissolves, when that goes away, in contemplation, in prayer, in these moments in our lives that are intense enough, that exhilaration that we feel, that aliveness that we feel, is the restoration of that garden-like connection. And so this is what our spiritual lives are all about, is to return to the garden, to be able to voluntarily now, not just because nerve and synapse hasn't closed yet, to voluntarily come back to that kind of presence whose consequence will be the joy, and then being able to share the awareness and then actually communicate it in any way that we can. This is what we're doing here. And I think this is what Jesus was trying to instill in us. It got lost over the millennia, but circling back, this is exactly what he's trying to show us, and he calls it kingdom.
Dave, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So up until this point, he's been talking about things in the realm of not soul. And all of a sudden now he's bringing soul to play. And so I'm curious whether, well, obviously that's intentional on his part, but what distinction do we make between human soul and human being here as we travel along? Because I can bring my awareness and focus to our session right now, but that's not my soul awareness. Do you know what I'm saying? Soul awareness doesn't have anything to do with physical senses.
I don't know that. Well, okay, you're trying to make a distinction between the physical body and the senses, and what we're talking about is soul.
And the soul, right, which is basically something that existed and then got overwritten by all this physical stuff as we age.
Well, I don't know that I didn't see that same distinction. I mean, even the three centers of experience that we've been talking about for the last few weeks are really the same thing. The body, the heart, and the mind are really still the manifestations of being loving and awareness and sharing awareness with each other. Those are still that same three-part sort of system that he has going on. So I don't know that he was making a hard and fast delineation between the two. Obviously, our bodies to be, and what did he call it? And it wasn't incarnated. He had another way of putting it. I'm not finding it right now. But
talks about embodiment.
Embodiment. Okay, so we are a physical embodiment of our consciousness right now. We're experiencing consciousness through our bodies, which is going to end at some point, right? But our consciousness will continue on. And so, yes, there is a difference between those two, but even the body somatically is going to be processing the presence and then the love and the awareness. So I don't know that he's making that hard and fast a distinction. At least I didn't feel that. But yeah, you may have. And I don't know if that gets us any closer to what you were trying to achieve when you asked the question.
I don't know either. I have to just sort of ride with it until something gets clear.
Yeah. Yeah. I am not a huge fan of making all these distinctions between matter and spirit and the tripartite, human human being that we have talked about in Greek philosophy. I really like the Hebrew version of all this, where we are just nefesh haya, which is just a living being, and so Hebrews and Jews don't make that big distinction about different parts. To them, it's just you're a living being. Everything is manifested here and now. God forms Adam out of the clay and then breathes life into his nostrils, and that's the nefesh haya. That's the living being. And so they don't make these kind of distinctions. And I think that's healthier, not to try to be continuing to break things down. I understand what he's doing here with being loving, aware, and that is the experience that we have through our embodied consciousness. And I think that's useful for us to understand. But breaking us into all these separate parts, I think, isn't doing us a whole lot of good, at least not in my thought process.
Mm.
Dave, the kind of, let's see, kind of the middle of the first paragraph where he says that healthy baby of an unmedicated mother is born alert and fairly calm. He, and the rest of that paragraph, he wiggles to the mother's belly if allowed to do so. If misfortune of modern medicine prevents him, he will eventually get another chance. What if none of that stuff happens to the baby?
Wait, ask that again.
What if none of that stuff happens for the baby?
Right.
What about the flip side?
Mhm.
What if it is a medicated mother and the baby's born not alert or calm?
Well, that's going to be a problem, isn't it?
No,
I
but
mean,
he'll have another chance. The medicine will wear off.
Mm.
It's the sedation of the mother that goes to the baby.
no, but
It'll
the
wear off.
baby gets those meds, especially if,
Yeah,
narcotics and
yeah, yeah.
illicit drugs. But I think that's what he's saying. This is the normal course of events. He's going to make the point later on that the baby doesn't get the chance to do what naturally would happen,
Right.
laying on the mother's belly and then crawling up to the breast and being a part of that bonding experience. Because what happens when the baby is born in a modern hospital? The umbilical cord is cut and the baby is whisked away, to be wiped down and weighed and get the Apgar score and all that kind of stuff it does. And eventually it's wrapped and brought back to the mother, but now it's wrapped and brought back to the mother. It's not necessarily skin to skin contact. And so our modern medical practice has kind of interrupted the flow of this initial bonding that has happened for, millennia. And so, but he's saying, even if that doesn't happen anymore at the moment of birth, it's going to happen later on in the course of the mother just caring for the baby. So hopefully he'll get another chance. But I mean, you're right. There are some infants that are born in situations that just preclude any of that
Right.
initial bonding, and that's very harmful, of course.
And there are situations where it's an unwanted baby that's
Mhm.
born, and you don't have an attentive mother or an interested mother,
Mhm.
and the effects of the baby will be very, very different than what is described.
Yeah.
Yep.
Back when I was born, breastfeeding wasn't a real big deal. We had bottles glass bottles. They weren't
A
even
glass bottle.
they're glass bottles back in the day, man, I'm telling you. And of course, I was adopted. So, my birth mother didn't have a chance to bond with me at all. I was whisked away and I was raised for the first 6 weeks or cared for by nuns, so there was no breastfeeding going on there. And then my mother, she wasn't able to do it, my adopted mother. So, I think I was able to overcome a lot of that. Maybe not. Maybe that's what's wrong with me.
It all makes sense now.
Nothing wrong with you, Dave. Nothing wrong with you.
Yeah,
When
it's we're all born on the spectrum, of course, but he's kind of looking, this would be the ideal. This is what is really going to be that ideal birth experience that he's talking about, that we're just experiencing the joy of being here. But obviously not every infant gets to do that.
I wanted to add too, when I had my girls, my daughters, they were like 9, 10-month-old infants. I made sure there was physical bonding. I carried them around like a kangaroo. And yeah, I think it makes a difference.
I
Yeah,
think
I
you're
And
right.
think yes.
they slept with me.
Mhm.
They slept with their parents. Yeah.
I believe that when kids are born in the hospital, even like preemies, like they wouldn't gain weight
Hmm.
without physical
Hmm.
contact.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow. I hadn't heard that. That's amazing.
like literally the nurses or a parent has to go and visit with them and just rest their hand on the kid. If and without that physical contact, they wouldn't gain weight and they'll eventually die.
Yeah, we have actually volunteers in a neonatal ICU
Mhm.
for those who can be cuddled because sometimes you cannot. You have the IVs and you have the all those tubes, but once they are, you can, despite the tubes.
Mhm.
Yes, there's volunteers who needs to cuddle them.
I
Mhm.
was actually left in the hospital for the first 6 weeks of my life because of my birth defects
Mhm.
and was losing weight and lost a significant amount of weight, such that my mother, if you knew her, sweet little thing, never, Catholic, never goes against the grain, stormed into the hospital and took me home. And I immediately started gaining weight.
Mhm.
So,
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great.
yeah.
I remember, I think it was following World War II, there were a bunch of orphans, I believe, that, lost parents and things like that during the war. And they ended up looking like they had all kinds of mental illness and developmental delays and all kinds of stuff. And it was just from lack of physical contact with someone who could provide this stuff that he's describing here.
Yeah.
So the next paragraph, you and I had some such passage into embodied consciousness. We all did, whether it was good, bad, or somewhere along that spectrum from ideal to somewhat less than that, we all had a passage into embodied consciousness. If there was a consciousness before, if you believe in the preexistence of the soul and whatnot, here we are now in embodied consciousness, you know, incarnated consciousness, if you want. We had no language. We had no language with which to encode it, so we can't remember it in story form, but we experienced it nonetheless. That's such an interesting sentence when you think about it. So what he's saying is we have the memory. The memory's in there, but it couldn't be encoded in a conscious way so that we can actually recall it, is what he's saying, which is really interesting. Um, I truly believe that every single one of us has photographic memory, eidetic memory, whatever. So everything we've ever experienced, everything we've ever thought, seen, heard, it's all in there. But we don't have access to it. Someone who has a photographic memory has access to all that stuff. We just don't have access to it. So those things that you can, I don't know what your earliest memory is. I think mine is at age 2, and then there's another one at 4 that I can close my eyes and still see the images. But that's it. That's as far back as it goes. I've heard other people tell me that their memories go back even further. I don't know, but this is an interesting way of looking at it. You know, if you didn't have any language with which to encode it, you can't remember it in story form, but it's still in there. And I know that the memories that I have from that far back are just flashes of imagery. It's not really a narrative to it. It's just an image. I can impose the narrative on it now and say, okay, that's when I had this, that's when that happened. But the memory itself doesn't have the story form. So it's just an interesting way of thinking about it or looking at it. Our first experience of being present as a body filled us with awe, and it happened in the company of at least one other human being. I believe it is the lost joy of that moment that brings the tears to our eyes at the sight of yet another arrival. That's cool. That could be it, you know? We still long for the purity of that first moment of simply loving being here together, for we are at our deepest soul level of being, loving, aware. And that's his definition of a soul, of being, loving, aware. And he had said earlier that he's going to be using that throughout the book and referring back to that, being, loving, aware, as we get further into the Ennea types themselves. But that purity of that first moment of simply loving being here, you know, how often do any of us during our day have the sense that we're just so glad to be here, breathing? You know, he gave us that little image of you're at work and one of your coworkers comes up and leans in close and whispers in your ear, "Isn't it just great to be here? Isn't it just great to be alive at work?" You know, what would you think about such a person? You know,
Crazy.
yeah, get away from me, man. This is my personal space. It sounds crazy. And isn't it interesting that we would look at someone like that as being crazy? You know, sometimes I think that's, you know, it's a two-edged sword. But our John Gibson, you know, long-haired John the Baptist and Gibson, he exudes a lot of that kind of just absolute inappropriate and out of place, you know, joy of being here. You know? And yet it's what we all should be feeling. What I was trying to express, I think it was just Sunday, I was saying, you know, one of the first things that the Fifth Way, the book is about, and one of the things that I had to confront first of all was my image of Jesus. If I'm really going to experience him as a first century Jew, and in the way that I think the Gospels really do preserve him, is that I got to get rid of all my preconceptions of him as some stoic, you know, King James language spewing guy who was just ramrod straight and stiff and holy and pious in the ways that we think that a holy sage should be, and start to see him rolling around in the dirt with kids, you know, and running along and encouraging his friends to look at the birds, Peter. You know, aren't they cool? He said, look at what they do. It's such a different way of looking at life, but I think that's who he was. You know, he had that kind of joy of being that we've not only lost, but we've devalued. We don't think that that's dignified. We don't think that that's, you know, what holy people are supposed to do. But I think we have to let go of a lot of the seeming dignity and get back to this kind of just simple joy of being here. And so he's saying it's the lost joy of that moment. It's that kind of exuberance, that kind of pure presence that brings the tears to our eyes when we see it in one of these infants. When we look at that picture that I'm still looking at over here that Lindy shared with us, you know, that kind of exuberance. When you watch some of those reels of really small infants laughing when they get their first laugh and they're laughing uncontrollably, can any of you not smile? Can any of you sit still and not join in that laughter? There's something about that pure, unadulterated, just sheer joy that you can't remain untouched by. And I think that's what he's trying to get across to us here.
You know, this, if anybody's seen this series, it's a little off track, Dave, but to your point about seeing Jesus as a, you know, not a King James version of, you know, uptightness. The series, The Chosen, I thought really did a great job of bringing that humanness to Jesus. As I don't know how many of you have seen it, but there was, I think, yeah, we're waiting for the next season, but when he was playing or making toys for the kids,
Yeah.
in one of the first couple seasons, I think there was and you know, dancing at the wedding at Cana, holding on to everybody and having fun, and
He jokes, he makes fun.
yeah,
He's a person.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just thought it was a beautiful image that we have not seen before. You know, it's all been Hollywood stuff, kind of. And this was more human. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, anybody who would give us the parable of the prodigal son with the imagery that it has, who doesn't live that way, is not a person with integrity. It's not the kind of integrated person that we know Jesus to be. He talked about abundance constantly. He showed it in all of his stories. And to think that he didn't live that way is just a contradiction in terms. And you're right, The Chosen was good at being able to show that side of him, that human side of him. But we need to confront that ourselves because what we imagine about Jesus, if we're supposed to be followers of Jesus and emulators of Jesus, it's going to have everything to do with how we conduct ourselves.
Yeah.
Are we going to be stick in the muds who think that holiness and purity means that we're going to have that stiff kind of existence, or are we going to be able to get down in the dirt with the grandkids and just roll around and love the moments that we have?
Mhm.
He says, whenever we encounter such moments in nature, in romantic love, with our children, friends, teachers, and therapists, we inscribe them in our memories as signposts to guide us back to similar encounters again. This is our nature. In the spiritual traditions, these are called sacred spaces, encounters with essence or Wan Shi, the original life energy. We had our first taste of them, if we were fortunate, as we arrived. But as we're saying, not everybody gets to. When we talk about, on Mother's Day, when we talk about the mother's love, which if we don't see God as both mother and father, then we're always going to see God as a distant judge. We're always going to see God as the distant king, the executor. If we can't merge that with Mother God as well, who is the one who scoops us up and holds us close and takes care of us, Jesus always led with Mother before he brought Father to the relationship. He always accepted first, drew people in first, allowed them just to be whoever they were in his presence first. And once the relationship was established and he was invited in, then he was able to do the fatherly thing, to instruct them. Yeah, now go and sin no more. Now that you've found that there really is forgiveness here, now that you've found that relationship still exists, now go and don't do the things that are going to separate you out again. But the teaching always came later. The instruction came later, or the discipline came later. What came first was the mother's love. And until we can see God as mother, we're never going to be intimate with God as father. It has to be that. And so having this taste of this pure joy, this pure connection, if we don't get it at birth in those first few moments and experiences, hopefully we have a chance to get it later. And if our childhood was really, really a rough one, and I've talked to a lot of those people, basically raised by wolves, then they've got a lot of knots to untie in their cords, unfortunately, and they may not get them all untied. But that is part of the journey as well. We all come out of childhood with knots in our cord, and we're all still untying a lot of those, most likely. But that's what this journey is about as well, is untying those knots and getting back to the ability to have this kind of unadulterated presence.
Mm.
David, I don't know how many of the people here have read Richard Rohr's book, Immortal Diamond, but it's if you have read that book, if any of you have read the book Immortal Diamond by Richard Rohr, I'm feeling a lot of what you're saying in that book as well, where it's like we are born with this thing and we spend so much of our life getting away from it, and then we realize that we're not where we want to be, and so we start stripping those things away just to get back to what we had in the very beginning, which was that precious sense of identity and intimacy with God.
Mhm.
Amen.
Perfect. Perfect. Yep. Richard Rohr is hot on this topic, and yeah, yeah. I haven't read that particular book, but it echoes a lot of what he says in most of his writing. Yeah. And it harkens back to what Jesus said, you're not going to find kingdom. And we got to remember what kingdom is. Kingdom is the same thing. Kingdom is this unadulterated presence. Kingdom is the joy that is the consequence of being that present and living life through that kind of lens and that awareness that everything is one thing and we're a part of this oneness, even as we go about our separate lives. And kingdom isn't out there someplace to be discovered by observation. He says, you're not going to say, oh, look, here it is, there it is, as you're waiting for it to happen. Kingdom is already here. It's within you. We are trying to get back to where we actually started in the garden. But when we do get back to the garden, we'll bring to it something we didn't have when we were there originally. And that is our volition. That is our ability to choose. That is the awareness of ourselves, as ourselves. And yet we're still choosing and able to let that go in favor of the connection and the oneness. This is what Paul praises in Jesus, the kenosis. He didn't grasp as that divine power, that divinity, as something to be held onto, but let it go and became one of us, the emptying. And this is the age-old shape of the journey, But we're literally returning to where we started, just like Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. We all have the ruby slippers on. We can go home anytime we want. There is nothing out there that's not in your own backyard that you need to go find. But we got to take the journey to find out we didn't need to take the journey, is basically the way this works.
So I have a question. You've done a lot of podcasts on this contemplation and spiritual practice. And somehow I think this Enneagram is supposed to be, and maybe this is wrong, is supposed to be a relationship with other things or beings or people, and how to work with our person, mind, body, with other people. So is this, I guess how do I bridge the inner experience and the spiritual practice with reaching out to other people? I guess that's where I'm it feels like there's a little bit of a stream in between or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, what the Enneagram is, it's a tool that he calls a map also. It's a tool, it's a map that can aid each one of us in understanding how we process our experiences, how we process reality, how we process relationship, how we process the challenges that we face in our lives. What is the characteristic way? What's the primary way that we react as we are just moving through the experiences of lives? Because if we can figure that out, and then we can retrace our steps and see how we got there, that is the first step. Awareness is always the first step in the spiritual growth, in the transcending of those. Because the idea is we want to move to the center of the wheel. We want to move to the pivot of the Tao. We want to move to that space around which everything rotates. And if we don't know ourselves, if we don't understand how we tick and why we tick, then we really don't have any kind of foundation or leg to stand on and a way to be able to grow. So that is what the Enneagram is for. It's not simply to label ourselves as a type and then sit in that type. It's a tool to help us to be able to transcend. Now, our personalities are pretty, much fixed at an early age. And that doesn't mean that we're going to suddenly not be whatever type we are. We're not going to suddenly not be an introvert or whatever. That's still there. But we can transcend that. We're actually strengthening the weak hand or the weak arm and balancing all these energies out. And so that's what the Enneagram is for. And it's going to be there for us not only in our relationships with others, but also in what we were talking about last night as the vertical relationship, the connection with, I suppose, self and God as spirit, and the oughts that we were talking about, the way things should be, that universal moral and ethical understanding that we're all born with somehow because it's coming from without. And then also the horizontal, the relationships that we have with each other in all creation. So it's going to aid us in all of that, in all of our endeavors. To know yourself is going to be so important in any spiritual formation. So the Enneagram is a tool. It's a good tool. It's not the only tool, but it's the tool that we're studying right now. So I hope that helps, Jennifer. Yeah. Any of you Enneagram experts have any other way of answering Jennifer's question? Kathy,
No.
William?
That's a good way what you just said, Dave, I think. Also, it also helps you look at yourself and see some of your own blind spots, as well as how you relate to others or how you process life. So it's sort of all encompassing. And then I like that about it too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you nailed it.
Okay,
Mm.
cool. All right. Well, that brings us right up to the hour.
Mm.
Amazing. We only got 2 paragraphs done tonight. If Frank
Yes,
Billman were
fine.
here, he'd be taking me to task. But
Yeah.
at least we didn't go backwards, so I'm safe.
Oh, but we did go backwards because of that great thing on page 11 that you
That great.
shared with us after Lindy's song.
Oh, I did do that, but we still ended up 2 paragraphs ahead. There have been Wednesday nights where we literally ended up behind where we left off the week before because we went back and we never got back to where. So I never heard the end of that for years. But yeah, at least we got 2 paragraphs in. But this is good stuff, and I love the rabbit trails that we run off in. I love the stories because that's what really enriches us. And I hope that all the stories and everything you hear is starting to get the concept of what we're talking about, deeper and deeper. And then of course, Lindy, again, thank you so much for sharing your song and your photo with us at the beginning, because that also is just part of the story, you know. Just stitch all the stories together and we're going to get someplace. All right, Scotty.
Thank you, Lord, for this night. It was such a great night. I felt your presence and your peace and your joy and your happiness and just the relationship that's always available for us to dive in whenever we care to. I was able to get a hold of a piece of that tonight, and I hope my fellow classmates here got a little piece of it themselves. We thank you, Lord, for everything you do and just the way you love us and your expression of love in our lives. We thank you. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and we say our amens and we ask you to be with Lindsay, with tonight, and Karen to continue in her healing, and all the people that are on the list. I can't remember them all right now, Lord, but people are always looking to you for healing and for provision and for guidance and direction. And I just pray that we're able to connect with you in such a way that we really learn when you answer our prayers, which you're probably answering them all the time, but we don't recognize them. We don't recognize the answer yes and how that's going to fit into our present game plan for our life. So help us with our wisdom and our understanding, which comes from you. It says that we have not because we ask not. So we're asking, Lord, guide us and direct us and protect us. We love you. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.
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 Hey,
And
God.
Sherry, it was so good to have you here tonight. Thanks for joining us. And you don't just have to join us through Lindy's Zoom connection. You can have your own connection and join us from Washington if you would like. We'd love to have you. But meantime, you guys have a great Sisters Week, okay?
We will.
Yeah.
All right.
And
And the
everybody,
rest of you too. Have a great week without your sisters or with your sisters or whatever you do.
and the Blue Jays are beating the Dodgers. It's 3-1 right now. Game.
What?
Whoa.
No, it's 6-1, not
Is
3-1.
it?
Six to one, Kathy.
Oh my gosh, I got bad information.
Yeah, whoever gave that
Okay.
information, they must have fell asleep at the
This
wheel.
is bad.
Oh, no.
That's what happens when you put the pause on the remote control so nobody will catch you watching the game.
Or just been watching it for us. So.
Tell her to
Exactly.
put the popcorn away.
All right. All right.
Game's
We'll see
over.
y'all Sunday.
All right, boys and girls, have a
bye.
great night, everybody.
Good night,
Love you guys.
everybody.
You guys.
Good night,
Bye.
guys.
Good night, Jordana.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, Bill. Good night,
So Dave,
Jennifer.
I have a question.
Hold on a second. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.